One thing about getting old is that everything seems to disappear. I've been teaching for 60 years, same institution, they've come, they've gone. Friends have gone, people I've loved have gone, I've lost a wife, I've lost a daughter, much to contend with. And there's nothing worse than grief, because it's an illness, and you can't function. And yet somehow you have to. So what do you do? Well, we have support groups. My family, thank goodness, helped me survive. The faith I had helped. And an old lobsterman in Maine helped. After my wife had died, I heard that Arthur Clarke's wife had died. And Arthur worked part-time as a plumber. He put in my bathroom up in Maine after I built my house. He was better known in the vernacular as Arthur Clack. So Arthur, I went to see him when I went back to Maine the next summer. I wanted to know how he was doing. And we sat in his kitchen and talked. And he said, I'm doing all right. But the house was empty. And he just knew that his life would never be the same. And yet he said, you know, it takes 4 seasons. And I never thought of it that way. I was thinking in terms of a year, and that was an eternity. After my daughter died, I read books on grief, and they were somewhat helpful. Writers would talk about the stages of recovery. And yet it made things seem so mechanical. And we're all human, after all. And it's different with all of us to go through this. Another thing that helped me was, there's a book called Letters to a Young Poet by Maria Rilke. He was the great poet in Germany. And a young man wrote him and said, what can I do to be better at what I'm doing? Could you give me advice about this? And his advice was very simple. The book's wonderful. People read it. He said, accept it all. We have a tendency to feel that the negative should somehow be forgotten and pushed aside. He said, make use of everything that happens to you. The good, the bad, and the different, in the indifferent. It makes you better. And I think because of the fact that what I went through, a cohort of mine at school, wife died, shortly after my wife died. So I wrote him a letter and I said, we are now brothers in grief and will always remain so. For years he would call me. Once he called me from Spain. He's disappeared, I think he's long dead. But somehow we need an empathy. And if you don't go through something like that yourself, you have no sense of really what it's like for other people. I don't have answers to any of this. I'm still angry. Not at anybody, but it's just the way things work out. We want life to be perfect, and yet it isn't. And I think about the war zone, and when I was in the military, death seemed so arbitrary. People would get killed. I had a wonderful lieutenant, a handsome man, he was about 6'6". He used to, this is when I was in Korea, he would sniff the air in the spring and he would say, he was from the South, he would say, the wisteria are blooming now. He was killed by shrapnel. A piece of shrapnel went through his helmet. If he'd been 6 feet tall, he would still be living. So it's hard to figure these things out. We don't know. We just take things on faith, go on living, and I believe Mr. Rilke. Accept it. Do something with it. Make it work. Had an aunt who used to scrub the kitchen floor when she got depressed. My father said, go out and do something. Forget yourself. Do something for somebody else. So there are ways of surviving all this. And yet I have bare bones. And we all go through these things.
How do you navigate that in-between time of being filled with grief and yet pulling yourself by the bootstraps?
Well, I think sometimes you have to see it the other way, because my wife died at 29. Seriously, even alive. My daughter was 12. And yet, the happiest time of my life. And how wonderful that was. So grief is here, the joy of it's on this side. So there's a balance that somehow we get out of all this.
And the Spirit speaks through it all.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm hearing you say is that you're able to accept what happens, the good,
yes,
the challenging, the indifference.
And somehow make use of it. Rilke would say, write a poem, write a book, see somebody, do something for somebody. Worst thing in the world is feeling sorry for yourself. And I'll never lose the anger that I have over what happened. I can't. I don't want to forget it, because it was so important, terribly important, all those things. My daughter loved to sing, and I can still hear her voice in the house. What nourishment.
There's something about when you're in the valley and you're seeing the dry bones all around you, and then being able to witness them come to life, to see everything be restored.
Yeah, and grief is an illness, and you get over it.
And it takes time for everybody.
Yeah, and it takes some courage to feel joy these days. You just have to put things in their place.
But if we have God's Spirit within us,
yes,
how much easier is it
yes,
to experience that joy?
Yeah, and faith is important. So many people think that lack faith, and you wonder how they can go on living. What's the importance of? You have to have something important in your life.